is America's answer to the challenge facing the free world.
Conflict were sown. The Allies disagreed on the future of Europe. The U.S. championed democracy and free markets. 1948, Stalin blockaded West Berlin, attempting to starve the city into submission. Program culminating in the historic moon landing in 1969.
Than they could possibly need simply to deter an attack.
In the shadow of nuclear annihilation, two superpowers emerged from the ashes of World War II, locked in a silent struggle that spanned decades. This was the Cold War, a war fought not with weapons, but with ideology, espionage, and a race to control the fate of the world. Welcome to our deep dive into the Cold War, a period of intense geopolitical tension between the United States and the Soviet Union from 1947 to 1991. This is the story of a world divided, of spies and secrets, and of a global chess game that brought us to the brink of destruction. Our story begins in the aftermath of World War II. Europe lay in ruins, and the balance of power had shifted dramatically. The United States and the Soviet Union, once uneasy allies against Nazi Germany, emerged as the world's two superpowers. At the Yalta and Potsdam conferences in 1945, the seeds of conflict were sown. The Allies disagreed on the future of Europe. The U.S. championed democracy and free markets, while the Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, sought to expand its communist ideology. Winston Churchill famously declared that an iron curtain had descended across Europe. This metaphorical barrier separated the Soviet-controlled East from the democratic West. In response, the United States adopted a policy of containment, aimed at preventing the spread of communism. President Truman articulated this strategy in 1947.
The Marshall Plan plus aid to China. The program to aid free nations against red aggression becomes a law.
The signing of this act is a momentous occasion in the world's quest for enduring peace. This measure is America's answer to the challenge facing the free world,
promising to support free peoples resisting subjugation. The Marshall Plan followed, pouring billions into Western Europe to rebuild economies and resist communist influence. Berlin, the heart of Germany, became the first major battleground of the Cold War. In 1948, Stalin blockaded West Berlin, attempting to starve the city into submission. In a dramatic show of resolve, the U.S. and its allies launched the Berlin Airlift, supplying the city by air for almost a year. This bold operation not only sustained the people of Berlin but also demonstrated the West's commitment to counter Soviet aggression. The Cold War was marked by an unprecedented arms race. Both superpowers amassed vast arsenals of nuclear weapons, capable of destroying the world many times over. This era also saw the advent of the space race, a competition to achieve spaceflight supremacy. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, shocking the world and igniting fears of Soviet technological superiority. The United States responded with the Apollo program, culminating in the historic moon landing in 1969. Perhaps the closest the world came to nuclear war was during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev secretly placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. President John F. Kennedy demanded their removal, leading to a tense 13-day standoff. The world held its breath as the two superpowers edged toward catastrophe. Ultimately, Khrushchev agreed to withdraw the missiles in exchange for a U.S. promise not to invade Cuba and the secret removal of American missiles from Turkey. The Cold War was fought on many fronts, often through proxy wars in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The Korean War, Vietnam War, and numerous other conflicts were fueled by Cold War rivalries. Espionage also played a critical role. The CIA and KGB engaged in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with spies, double agents, and covert operations shaping the course of history. By the late 1960s and 1970s, both sides sought to ease tensions through a policy known as détente. Landmark agreements like the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks and the Helsinki Accords aimed to reduce the risk of nuclear war and improve relations. President Nixon's historic visit to China in 1972 and subsequent meetings with Soviet leaders were significant steps toward a more stable and less confrontational world. In the 1980s, the Cold War saw a resurgence of tensions under President Ronald Reagan, who took a hardline stance against the Soviet Union.
Statutes protecting the rights of unborn children. Abortion on demand now takes the lives of up to 1.5 million unborn children a year.
He famously described it as the evil empire and ramped up military spending, including the controversial Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars program.
The final fact is that the Soviet Union is acquiring what can only be considered an offensive military force. They have continued to build far more intercontinental ballistic missiles than they could possibly need simply to deter an attack.
However, Reagan also engaged in significant diplomacy, working with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to sign groundbreaking arms reduction treaties. The Cold War began to thaw with Gorbachev's reforms of glasnost and perestroika. These policies, coupled with economic stagnation and growing unrest in Eastern Europe, set the stage for dramatic changes. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the end of Soviet control over Eastern Europe. Just 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union itself dissolved, marking the official end of the Cold War. The Cold War reshaped the world in countless ways. It spurred technological advancements, from nuclear energy to space exploration. It also left a legacy of divided nations, as seen in Korea and the enduring tensions between NATO and Russia. As we reflect on this pivotal era, we recognize both the peril and the progress it brought. The Cold War may be over, but its echoes continue to influence global politics and our quest for peace and security. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Cold War. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious and informed.